record.
All right, very cool.
And then I'll get this set up to me.
Oh, awesome slideshow. Cool. Excellent.
All right, we are a go.
We're gonna do something. Forget to turn on your mic.
Oh, mic on. Wow, there's nobody out there in Zoom land.
Gotta be careful.
Is there one?
Touching the mic too. It
Oops.
picks it up really, really well. Sliding it, moving it.
Okay, you're right. Okay, is there anyone out in Zoom land? In a moment?
Yes, yes, there
okay.
is.
Hi, Patricia. Oh, good. We can hear
Hi.
you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, awesome. Okay,
Thank
very
you.
cool.
There's quite a few.
Thank you.
Oh, there are?
You just
Okay.
can't see 'em.
Oh, okay. They're hidden. The people are hidden in the screen. Okay. Hey, happy Tuesday. It's time to get started, I think. Or maybe a few seconds. And this is a loaded topic today. Very loaded topic. As if it hasn't been for the last 2 years. Okay. All right, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and start this. So COVID-19, where are we with this here in 2022? All right, so what is this? What is the state of things? What is happening? Are we still in a pandemic? There are lots of voices about that. Some say, yes, we are. Some are saying, well, we're out of that pandemic phase. So there's kind of mixed voices out there. Some are saying this is now becoming more endemic, or, it's moving to certain areas instead of being so widespread. But gathering, what we hear from the news, it's still cropping up in many places. And if you live in certain areas of the world, they're still locking people down. So, yeah, interesting, isn't it? And all the variants, that's another thing too that has people puzzled. I think has me puzzled too, because, from other voices, other physicians, and other interesting papers and websites, this is becoming kind of like the flu. And if you know anything about the flu is something that we're always behind in the first place. In other words, when we're vaccinating people this year, it's always for last year's variants or last year's, what was the latest and greatest flu going around, and not what's going on this year. We're a year behind. And I think that's what's going to happen with, this new virus. So, gosh, let's see, maybe I should be forwarding this because I'm kind of, yeah, here we go. Sorry, I've stayed on this a little too long. I have a lot of questions here. In fact, the whole first slide is full of questions that in the ensuing slides will answer little by little. So yeah, and by the way, I'm recording this, so it will be in the cloud. So again, I think from what I've heard and read, still the most vulnerable populations are those who are, on the elderly side of life, typically, not always, but and those who are have trouble with their immune systems as well. Could be for any reason. People with cancers, for instance, they usually have trouble up and down with their immune systems, or if they have some other autoimmune disease, that they might also be liable to get this. And so there are a lot of people who are at risk. Obviously locations like nursing homes, et cetera, where, and even in hospitals still, there's a little bit of risk of that, even with all the screening processes. So again, I think what it'll come down to is the individual. And I do believe the virus is pretty much here to stay. It's going to crop up on an annual basis. It just, like most viruses, they become less deadly as time goes on, which is nice as far as variants go. Unless a brand new virus, say a SARS-CoV, whatever number comes out, then we're talking about a different animal or a brand new animal. And hopefully we won't be talking about that, or won't cross that bridge until we get there, if we get there. So yeah, it's going to be a lot like influenza. So from that sense, I think that hopefully we'll have people thinking not so panicky about it, that this is going to be something that you'll just have to continue to practice extra self-care. That's what it's going to come down to. Yeah.
So when someone's been exposed, like they said, there was a super spreader event.
Yeah.
Does that just mean you've been exposed, but you don't have it, or it could be both?
Well, a super spreader event, that could be event
Tested positive.
where somebody tests positive. But that's a loaded question as well, because you could test positive and not have any symptoms at all, or have very little. Or on the other end of that, you could end up within a week with a full-blown condition, whether that's in the hospital or at home. And it's going to affect every individual. It's going to affect different. You know, not everybody is going to come up with the very same signs and symptoms. It's like flu. Does flu hit the same person? Does it hit everybody the same way? No. So does a cold hit everyone the same way? No. No. It's, you know, what's going on with that individual constitutionally? What state of health are they in as far as care goes? Yeah.
So if you're likely to get a cold or flu, like say, I haven't had a cold in years, is it likely that you are less prone to be affected positively with the coronavirus?
Well, that's hard to say. If your immune system's doing what it should do, it more than likely has encountered this virus at some point. Because remember, they discovered this was a thing in 2019, but boy, it had already been running the gamut of society and culture worldwide, you know, long before it was identified. That's the thing. I think if your immune system is doing what it's supposed to do, it will encounter it, and you may have a response. May be a strong response, or it may not be a very strong response at all. But, you know, in the meantime, you're also acquiring immunity from being exposed. And that's a good thing. Some people say, oh, that's not a good thing, but they're waiting for the right vaccine, which is a whole nother can of worms. The right vaccine to help my immune system ward this off. But I don't think we're even close to that, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, again, that's a whole nother question too. But yeah, I think if you're staying healthy, keeping as healthy as you can, you're controlling whatever chronic conditions you may have, lung, heart, digestive, brain, and the rest of your system, kidneys, etc. If those are healthy and your system is healthy, your encounter with it is likely to be shorter and less severe. But yeah, that's an issue that is hardly brought up, to be honest. And I've been wondering that from the start. That almost takes a whole discussion by itself too. But you bring up, that's a good question, you know, about, you know, if you've been able to ward off colds, what about this virus? Well, I think if your immune system is doing what it should, then you should be in good shape. Doesn't mean you won't get sick, but your immune system will develop the antibodies and the immune response necessary so the next encounter you have will not be severe. So it comes from a natural immunity from exposure. So yeah, it's a good point. It's a good question. Let's see. Yeah. Again, I still think this is a loaded question. The idea of, are we or aren't we in a pandemic? So if you go on to the different websites on the internet, you'll see many say, or putting that same question out there, has the pandemic become endemic? Is it now something that's on a smaller scale? Is it something that's more regional and easier to handle? And voices like Dr. Fauci on the one hand said, yes, this is becoming more regional and we're out of the pandemic. And then the CDC comes up and says something different, or the WHO, or somebody else comes up and says something completely different. It makes it difficult to, how do we sift through the truth? And why aren't we speaking with more of an informed voice instead of at variance so much, which is something I've noticed even from the people who do it for a living, like the CDC, the NIH. It's like, So I don't know. I approach all this with a lot of healthy skepticism. I'll just say that right off. Healthy skepticism. But that's the way it's always been for me as a nurse. So, okay, on to the next slide here. Any questions? So I'm looking for my cursor here. Are we okay? We good? Okay, we're going to move on then. I think this is the biggest issue. Self-care. Again, this is something I think that's been underutilized as far as talking points, not only by physicians, but by public health. What do you do? What can you do on a personal level besides locking yourself in and wearing a mask? Well, it can include everything from, simple matters of washing your hands, to masking, to avoiding places that have poorer ventilation than others. Surface cleaning, is the surface you're working on, is it something that's, oftentimes very dirty? Because your hands can pick those things up. And just like influenza, COVID lasts for a while on various surfaces. So yes, it's respiratory, but some of that, falls out and becomes surface acquired too. And it can live for a while on different surfaces. So, most of my nurse colleagues, everything now is from telephones to computer tops to surfaces on tables, to surfaces inside patient rooms. Everything has, cloths impregnated with bleach, hydrogen peroxide, some sort of, and some bactericidal wipes as well. So everything gets wiped down. And it's not that we weren't doing that before this hit. We were, but now we're seeing this pretty much everywhere. Self-cleaning, and places where that's happening, in restaurants, even downstairs in our laboratories, we have, the containers with wipes that we use on all kinds of surfaces and on equipment when we're done using them. So I think people have to use their good judgment, exercise some good judgment here, some common sense. I think everybody can do that. It's kind of a mindfulness type of living, that's how I look at it. Because in a sense, can you always rely on a shot injection? I don't think so. But you can rely on other measures that you're taking as probably your best moves while we wait for an effective immunization to come out. Okay, what happened to my shoot? Okay, there it is. So this is just, I found this online. This tells you about the surfaces that, COVID can land on, and then the lifespan. In the air, it can last up to 3 hours on money, like coins, etc., or even paper money, I imagine, can be up to 4 hours. Cardboard containers and I would say paper products, probably up to 24. Stainless steel containers like that made of metal can last up to a couple of days. And then other plastics, up to 3 days as well. So they can last on different surfaces, even if we're also worried about, the airborne form of this. I would say you're doing your diligence if you wash your hands on a regular basis, especially if you're touching the mask a lot, which I see a lot of people do. It kind of diminishes the usefulness of a mask if one is always, working with it. And boy, the studies on that, I won't even get into masks. That's got its own separate PowerPoint. But so you can see right now that it does survive. It survives more, or I want to say better, and for a longer lifespan on solid objects. Okay. Again, who's at greatest risk? I think most of you have probably seen some of the literature where, they have pointed to individuals over 65, those who have compromised immune systems, individuals with several chronic illnesses, respiratory, heart, diabetes, kidney disease, cancer. These individuals have the greatest risk of getting the virus and maybe reacquiring it, and having a lengthy illness due to that. It's now kind of a given when I enter the hospital and I work with students or patients that many patients have what we call, complex situations. They have many things going on with them that have maybe nothing to do with why they're there, but they have several chronic conditions. And I thought, well, if they come in with something like influenza or SARS, it makes everything worse. It sets your system off in such a way that, your sugar is less well controlled, blood pressure is less well controlled, your breathing and health of your lungs is less well controlled and kept at bay, and blood sugar takes a really big hit as well. It simply does. And that's mainly due to the release of steroids, especially cortisol. Typically when patients come in and they're ill, their blood sugars go way up. And so, typically these individuals are most vulnerable. And so what is in our control? So things like the self-care, what we do for ourselves, how we maybe relate to and interact with others, and the care of our immediate environment. Those are things we can control. What other people do, we have less control of. The environment we're in, maybe a little less control than we want. So I think if we start thinking in terms of doing what's within our control, I also think what's going on up here, fear, panic, distrust, and everything that has come with this pandemic starts to get put into more of a perspective. So instead of catastrophizing everything, everything gets put into a perspective where it's not such a catastrophe, it's not such a big deal, and I'm doing everything within my control to deal with it. As I put, what is out of our control, even the public health response, mandates, dictates, those things we have absolutely no control over. So again, that's part of what others are doing, what other people do, what other entities are doing. So again, I thought this slide was really interesting. That's why I included it. Who do I choose to be during the COVID crisis? And again, this goes back to, what kind of self-care, what am I doing? And you can see the different zones. Probably the most, I want to say, the zone you don't want to be in is the fear zone, where all these things are going on. Panic, you act like the victim, blaming somebody else, hoarding things, search for every single news story out there. That's part of the fear, I think, that a lot of people dealt with at the beginning, and some people have not been able to get away from that. The next area, as people break out of that fear, is being in a mindset of learning about this without fear and panic. So you start to go into control mode, stop consuming that which causes me harm. And that could be anything. I would say mostly what we read and what we see on the television, et cetera, or what we see on the computer. And you make a program for yourself to make use of the time, et cetera. If everything has been upended, okay, what do I do now with things as they are in that upended condition? Well, you start working on that. And then hopefully recognizing that others out there are doing their very best while facing same complicated situation as you are. And you look for other opportunities to learn, improve, help others, and contribute rather than, bring about a negative, I want to say a negative vibe to things. And then finally, there's the growth zone, which I hope all of us are getting into by now. You live in the now. You're mindful of what you're doing now and not thinking about the past anymore. It's gone, and not worrying as much or so much about the future. You're paralyzed about now. I think that's a big deal. You're just moving forward and paying attention to who you are and what you're doing now. I'm not in the waiting room or in between things. This is the life. Ask how do I want this moment to be? In a lot of ways, that's a way of just being aware and getting out of what's been happening over the last 2 years, because eventually all of us will have to get out of that. If we haven't started to already, we need to start doing that. And be appreciative and grateful for what you have, friendships, being able to still do things, etc. I know in many other countries the restrictions are still very severe, I thought, oh, if only I didn't have to see this on the front page of things, but But yes, the state of things isn't the same for everybody over the entire globe. Much better for some, but not so good for others. So calling the shots. Vaccines and boosters versus risk assessments. Everybody has to decide, do you need to get, 1, 2, 3, or 4 shots? And many individuals that work from home probably don't need to get all these boosters. But individuals who are going out and working amongst the public, they might benefit from having a booster. Okay. You have to consider these things. What do you do for a living? And again, it comes back to using common sense. Use good judgment. What is your general health like? Now, if your health is not in good shape, you need to do something about it. You need to be proactive about it. Can't simply wait for the latest and the greatest version of the vaccine to come out. Vaccines in general really take years. Good ones, safe ones, effective ones take years, in spite of things you've been hearing. So they take years. Again, you have to think about your risk factors. What are they? Each individual, you have to think about your risk factors. You have to think about your chronic conditions, okay? And keep those in mind when you decide where to go, what to do, what kind of shots to get, and how to approach, a change in what you do and where you go. If you travel frequently or go to very large events, you probably need to consider what's the most prudent thing to do, whether it's masking, whether it's getting that next booster, or it might include things. You have to think about influenza. Did you get your flu shot on top of that? Or just simply ask your doctor, I'm going here. What is best for me? What do you think? So take the healthcare professional's opinion into what you decide to do. How does your age factor in? Well, it's not necessarily a big deal for individuals who are aging, but for the most part, so many things happen as we age. We don't bounce back as quickly. And the ability of our immune system to respond with a robust response is diminished some. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just doesn't have the same robustness as it did when we were younger. Does gender or race figure into the equation? In other words, do certain populations get hit harder for some reason, whatever that might be? Is it location? Is it what they do, what they practice, where they work, etc.? Do men get hit harder than women with these things? Because there are certain differences involved with gender. Men, from what I've read and what I've heard, men tend to get hit. They tend to get hit harder with this than women do. At least, well, that I think too, I haven't looked into that far enough. It's kind of like there's other areas of, on the health and wellness continuum that men get hit harder with something than women. But I think we, since this pandemic is what it's, we've only had it 2 years, not that I want it longer, I don't, but a lot of this data, I wonder how much of it has actually been compiled. And I haven't done much research about that. I've only heard it said in other documents or quoting other documents. So You know, I don't know how much variance or difference there is in that. Is it a big gap or is it a small gap? You know, in difference. And in other words, too, I want to know, what's the severity? Do men have a more severe response to this than women? Are there other factors? And I'm sure there are other factors involved, you know, differences in men and women in general that make getting the illness more severe in one gender versus the other. Again, boy, that's also a discussion for another PowerPoint for sure. You know, are you pregnant or likely to get pregnant? You know, I haven't done enough research into that, but I know it's been an issue over the last year about whether it's safe for women to get the vaccine while they're pregnant, or if they're expecting to get pregnant anytime soon. Is it safe? And we don't know enough about these vaccines. You know, they're, as far as a rollout goes, it's only been about a year and 4 or 5 months, maybe, you know, that the rollout has been continuous. So I don't think we know enough yet. So probably the best thing is to avoid fear, panic, and negativity. I think it's really hard. I think that's the difficult thing. You know, I hate to say news is a good thing, but news, on the other hand, just stokes the fire of panic and fear. You know, so I think it's a double-edged sword. So, you know, this is just one comparison chart. And they use, and the CDC has several, but they're using, you know, the risk, the relative risk, all of these different groups compared to individuals 5 to 17 years old from this particular sampling. So the rate of death, bottom line, compared to 5 to 17-year-olds, the rate of death is about 45 times higher as, you know, age groups climb and you get all the way up to 85 plus. But, you know, I don't know enough about the population that they sifted all this information from. You know, I don't know about the variables. So I can't take this and say, oh, this is a catastrophe, because I look at the numbers there and I'm wondering, okay, exactly what kind of population was this drawn from? And so, not that I'm asking any of you to go look up these things and then dissect, you know, what the CDC, NIH, or some other public health entity puts out, but you can't look at something like this necessarily and take it at face value. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say, because the numbers look catastrophic, but what's the population size? How many within that population represent each age group? What are the different variables of those individuals in each age group? So it leaves something to be desired as far as leading you to a conclusion as far as a small comparison of relative risk. So how has it changed our lives? I don't think I really need to. I think everybody has had their lives changed in one way or another. But, you know, on a positive note, we are now looking at our lifestyle choices and our activities, which is a good thing about, you know, being here is, you know, you're proactive, and you have been since before this, about your health in general, components of exercise, your diet, you know, what you're exposing yourself to, taking care of your conditions, etc. You're prioritizing what's important, and you're putting on the back burner things that are less important during this time. And we realize what it is like to lose certain freedoms in exchange for certain securities. And I've seen this quotation used so many times. You know, Ben Franklin is supposed to have said, those who give up liberty, essential liberties for temporary security deserve neither liberty or safety or security. I thought, well, okay, you know, that was used in a different context when Ben Franklin was using it. But, you know, again, this is a way too that different people have looked at this. They immediately see an infringement upon rights, securities, freedoms. And I get that. I understand that. And I think being locked up for so many weeks, months maybe, and having what we do in normal society closed off to us has very much looked like, you know, a diminishment of freedoms and liberties to do things. And so I can understand, I can see that from a certain point of view. You know, and as things have opened up over the last 6 to 8 months in a more meaningful way, some of these things we're gaining these things back. You know, so the hope for me is that people will respond by focusing and being mindful of their own state of being and their own state of wellness or illness, as it may be, and focusing on that, you know, as the, you know, the way out of this, the way to move forward, to not look back, but to move forward and do it in a positive way. Let's see. All right. So, oh, I heard so many voices about this. Some said, well, you know, the fact that we're not, the skies have cleared, the environment is cleared, wildlife is back, you know, invading certain areas, there are fewer cars, there's fewer crowding in certain places, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I think to myself, yeah, that certainly was a good thing. But normal state of affairs isn't like that. We need to find some way, if we're talking about the environment anyway, you know, we all live in it. We need to not say, well, this has been a good thing because it's focused on the environment. I thought, well, the environment here is really not the issue. That's another issue altogether, unless you're talking about dumping poisons and things like that into the environment, whether that be the soil, the water, et cetera. Then that becomes a big healthcare thing. But I think a lot of individuals have connected this to global warming, and I believe that's a separate issue.
But the issue of the environment that a person lives in.
That is right.
A factor, like. for
Yes, it
example,
can. On a micro level, absolutely. Again, that goes back to what can the individual control versus what they can't control. It's kind of like, you know, you live in a neighborhood full of houses and people and the street you live on, et cetera. Well, you have some control of your front yard, backyard, and you have control over your house. But what your neighbor does and what that other neighbor on the other side does and people across the street, you really have no control over what they do. So again, I guess this leads back, and I'm glad you brought it back to the micro level of your own environment and things you have control over. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me anyway, or the biggest thing I'd like you to take away is what you're doing for yourself, about yourself, and you know, proactively. Yeah, because I think too, we've realized this, we live in a much smaller world than we realize. Airplanes take us everywhere, cars take us everywhere, trains take us everywhere, boats, ships take us everywhere, bicycles take us everywhere, or, you know, relatively speaking. So we live in a smaller world where interchange of people is much broader and bigger. And guess what? you know, things are brought in and things move out, you know, as far as illness, disease, you know, that we're unaware of until something, you know, actually becomes an issue and is, you know, brought to, you know, the attention of that community or that group of people. So, yeah. Yeah, we live in a smaller world. So, but I think you all know that even before COVID hit, this is not the first illness that we've encountered. There was SARS-CoV-1, there was H1N1, there was bird flu, swine flu. There were different outbreaks of different adenoviruses as well. So it's not new that way. And well, right. Even going back to all the way back then, and influenza killed many more people. And, you know, boy, I don't know how well they kept records back then, aside from, you know, maybe official government documents and certain official histories of the time. I haven't looked into something like that. And both sets of grandparents lived through that, though. Neither set talked about it. I didn't ask about it either. So, yeah, I never got. I wish I'd asked something like that, but of course that didn't ever cross my mind while they were alive. So again, I think we're learning to celebrate health, celebrate managing chronic conditions effectively. And that was hard to do too, to be honest, because people were not so willing to go into the emergency department or go in to see their physician during COVID, or there were, you know, voices, or maybe their doctor said, don't come in, we'll call this in. And of course that was due to things like video visits, that kind of thing. And, but people were very much afraid of coming into the ED and being exposed to this. It's, you know, not like, you know, times past where not many people really thought about that. I know some did. If I ended up having to go into the ED for something, I never thought twice about someone else coming in with the flu or some other condition. But, you know, it's heightened our awareness to, you know, how quickly this goes around and has moved around over time. And hopefully, though, you know, I hope we're learning things from these last 2 years, and we're not learning, you know, fearfulness and apprehension and I want to say anticipating the next big, you know, virus. I mean, there's awareness and there's public health and these things that will be worked on, I'm sure. At least I hope so. And I hope that we're learning things. I hope on a government and a public health level, we're learning things. I really do. At the start of this pandemic, I was, you know, thinking to myself, I hope somebody out there who's an epidemiologist is actually compiling the numbers and is taking a close look at how we have addressed this. And somebody now, I hope, is still doing that. The response to this, what had public health told us to do, what government told us to do, what doctors told us to do on the, you know, the lower level at the hospital. You know, I hope that is being studied, and I hope information is being compiled on that to see ways to improve on this, because how we manage this, I still think wasn't the greatest. I really do think it wasn't the greatest way. We could learn things, and I really hope that we're learning things and this is being taken down. And the CDC, which, you know, I know they're an entity that needs to learn. And they need to take less of a political stand and more of a public health stand. That's how I see it. And government needs to do the same thing. Yes, you have your avenue, you have your lane on the highway. You need to stay there more and let public health and the system that handles healthcare do what they have been designed to do and not change lanes so often. So, and I think with many individuals, because that's happened, it's kind of sown doubt in the entire system. And that's where work needs to be done on the government and the public health level to renew trust, bring trust back. So,
But isn't there some empirical data to suggest that where we were 2 years ago versus where we are today, 8 years apart in terms of the number of deaths that we're having?
yes, there is. There's a lot of awareness of that too. The trouble is, who's looking at the data? And the individuals looking at the data, what kind of power and control do they have? And are they ignoring the data, simply put, or are they taking the data seriously? And this is what's puzzled me since the start, is that the data has been, pretty roundly ignored, even by the NIH and the CDC. I don't want to bash those entities, but they have not been looking at the data compiled, either on, compiled by entities outside their specific organization and looking at it and comparing data with other entities. I think there's been an awful lot of, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm not going to pay attention to other experts. I'm not going to pay attention to other entities studying this. This is where it's become an exclusive thing. And that has bothered me from the start. That has completely bothered me from the start. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Great Barrington Declaration. Came out and was actually a document put out in the fall of, is it the fall of 2020? Yeah, fall of 2020. And these were experts in their field of virology, epidemiology, public health, and medicine. And they took a stance that was at odds with the NIH, the CDC, and that whole thing quickly became political too. So not to go into that, but these were experts in their own field. The CDC and NIH have experts also, but these others outside of the NIH, outside of the CDC, their information was ignored. Their take on things was also ignored. And I always wondered why. But there was never a roundtable, so to speak, of experts on the government level, whether state or federal. And I've always wondered why that was the case. In other words, experts who come from different points of view on the matter get together and exchange the ideas and look at the data instead of coming and, I want to say, excluding everyone and everything else. And that, again, has bothered me. But yes, there's a lot of empirical data out there. The trouble is, and worldwide, not just state or nationwide, but worldwide, but it gets ignored and it's not looked at. And you don't hear about it.
Maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I'm looking at number of deaths that seem to have been.
It's gone down.
It's gone down
Considerably.
So that should be an indicator to.
It
the
should be.
average Common person.
Yes,
That we don't need to be as fearful as we were.
exactly.
initially.
And that's part of the evolution of this virus too. My understanding of it is that the latest iteration is more catchy, but it's less deadly. In other words, you recover from it with fewer problems, issues, and if you do get it, it's not likely to linger with you as long. So yes, there's plenty of data with that, about that. And should that be taken seriously? Yeah, I think it should. At this point, I don't think it is. And I'm not sure why. That's something that has been a big puzzle to me. I think all along. Yeah, I asked, well, what about others who are at variance? Well, do you vilify others? No, you don't. You look suspicious at others wearing a mask or don't wear a mask? No. Do you, oh, you haven't been vaccinated. Some of my friends, like a year ago or more, or even as late as last fall, were excluded from so many family gatherings and outings because they had chosen either not to get a booster or not get vaccinated. And I see how this has divided people. It's very divisive. And it's ruined relationships, for lack of a better way of putting it. Yeah. So, yeah, I think on an individual basis, those ties will take a while to patch up, if ever. And the boosters, again, you have to weigh your risk. You may not need it. It depends on what you're doing, who you're interacting with on a constant basis, what's going on with you health-wise, okay? Should you distance, go to crowded areas? Common sense is necessary. Your overall hygiene, you have to see to it. You have to. Washing hands, gel your hands, using antibacterial products, yes. I think that is something you need to do constantly. It's funny. When things started opening up and somebody lets loose with a cough or a sneeze, sometimes I've noticed, I look at people, so I notice others looking at that individual. And, I wonder, do they see those individuals as like a typhoid Mary, potential of spreading everything? And, now, our awareness is heightened to such an extent that we're looking at somebody who just coughed or cleared their throat. And, we see those individuals as a potential reservoir of infection. I try not to do that. Yeah, I put a little note in here. You probably all heard this story of Typhoid Mary. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I think it's going to take a while for us to look at each other normal again. And I think most of you would probably agree with that. Let's see, where was I here? I don't think I moved anything. So here's some online stuff you can look at. And some of these are links that will take you to, certain forums, as well as certain other websites that they quote different experts. I decided not to put anything from PubMed up there because I think they're probably a little too complicated. Some of the recent studies. So some of those studies are out there. When you mention the empirical data, boy, that just threw bells off in my head, because as we continue to amass data, the data that we do have, just doesn't seem to be taken seriously. I've heard other experts speak of the data, speak of the declines in infections and mortality rates, but what we keep hearing in the news, what you keep hearing from newspaper articles or internet sources is that that this is we're still in a state of emergency. I thought, well, we're 2 years into this, right? I don't think it's as bad as it was 2 years ago when we first entered this. I think if people were awake and aware and, paid attention to everything going on, they're much more educated about, this virus. So I think that's the good thing about it compared to 2 years ago. But yeah, I'm hoping they do more research, because the vaccines have given me pause a little bit. What were they meant to do? What kind of real immunity do they actually convey? How long is it good? Have studies been, I know there are studies out there comparing the natural immunity due to exposure to, the three marketed vaccines that are out there and eligible to be taken. And, the data on those isn't so great. And they actually lessen the condition of the disease more than they actually convey immunity in order to fight exposure to the illness, for lack of a better way of putting it, which has bothered me. I know every time I read something about pharmaceutical companies, I look at it very skeptical, in a skeptical sort of way, not exactly trusting what I see and what I read. And the unprecedented way that these companies have been allowed to release their vaccines in experimental, not just the trials, but in fact, I was skeptical about the way they had moved through human trials so fast, unusually fast, and then given emergency use so quickly, and then so widely, spread out in the population. It's just given me pause, because I don't think it's ever, I think it's unprecedented. I don't think we've ever come up with a vaccine that quickly in modern times. We've never come up with something that quickly in modern times. So anything rushed, to me, has potential for disaster. We don't know what these vaccines, in fact, will do. Studies are out there too about side effects and adverse effects. They're out there.
But we are all the long-term study.
Absolutely. We are the experiment. And so the data is being compiled, I hope. I think it is. Right. And so the long-term studies, we probably won't, about the events, whether they're side effects versus this is an actual adverse condition here or response to this, to the vaccines, because, there's so much response now about blood clots, Guillain-Barré, myocarditis. And I want to say now there's all kinds of new stuff coming out about how it affects kidneys, liver, brain. And the long COVID is something too that's basically a newer issue. But, I think other viruses in the past, including influenza, can also have long-term effects, especially if it's a bad one, like we've had in the past. Other flu strains have actually presented some long-term issues to the individuals has to deal with, after either having the virus itself, or having the injection. I had a student several years ago that had such a bad response to the flu vaccine. She had swelling in her upper extremities, and she had a very bad anaphylactic response. Now, what would have happened if this had happened due to COVID? Incredible swelling. And this happens just very shortly after the injection. Incredible swelling and anaphylaxis comes into play. And I just wonder, how entities that say, you absolutely have to have this vaccine or you cannot work your job. But I had an anaphylactic reaction to it. I swelled up like the Michelin tire man and I couldn't breathe. Tough luck. You have to have it. In other words, getting a medical waiver is much, 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 much harder to get than it used to be under conditions as usual in the past. It was much easier to refuse those. Now you can't. In some places you can't. Your job won't allow you unless you just want to be laid off permanently, fired, from your job. So it presents a lot of problems. This whole response thing, again, presents a lot of problems. That's part of, like, I want to say, government and public health. I want to say, just totally destroying the individual, I think, at least from a certain standpoint. And does that sow distrust? Oh, you bet it does. Are those individuals who are before this likely to get a vaccine? Are they going to be more likely to get a vaccine in the future? Because the government basically said, you do this or we're taking this away. And so that kind of line of thinking and acting has been a huge concern for me, because I see a lot of my fellow nurses, some of them just up and out quitting, or retiring early, or simply refusing to get the injection, the shot, the vaccine, and they lose their job over it. Seems draconian in kind of a way to me.
That's
But-
where the fear factor comes in, because it's
Right.
so brand new. People, this is our generational issue.
Yeah,
And until all of that stuff gets itself worked out. and
yes.
Who knows how long it's gonna work itself out.
Yeah, nobody knows. You're right.
We're gonna have to deal with these really complex situations. Unfortunate, but I just think it's part of that whole process of.
Yeah. I think this is unique. And again, I hope historians as well as public health experts are taking notes, because if they aren't, then we're, like they say, you don't learn from your past, you're doomed to repeat it. And there's so many examples from history of that. And if we don't learn something from this, we're going to do it all over again the next time something strikes. We're going to do all the same things over again and again and again and again. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm done. Any questions? Yeah. Any questions out there in Zoom land? Oh my God, anybody still out there? Well, we're officially ending. And it is on the cloud, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the record. Where is that? Let's see. Chat, poll, share. Oh, here we go. Stop share.